You already know how to manipulate people. Not consciously, not with intention, but your brain does it automatically every single day. It tells you the task can wait. It tells you you're not ready. It tells you tomorrow is a better day to begin. And you believe it every time, because it's not coming from outside you. It's coming from you. That voice isn't your wisdom. It's your subconscious running a protection program it wrote when you were 7 years old. And until you learn to manipulate that program the same way it manipulates you, with cold, calculated psychological precision, procrastination will keep winning. This video is not about productivity hacks. It's not about morning routines or dopamine detoxes or writing your goals in a journal. Those are accommodations. What you're about to learn is a complete psychological override. And the tools we're using come from the darkest corner of personality psychology, the Dark Triad. The Dark Triad refers to 3 personality traits that researchers have identified as distinct, overlapping, and, in clinical excess, socially destructive: narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy. In their pathological form, these traits produce people who exploit, deceive, and dominate without remorse. That is not what this is about. What most people miss is that these same traits, in their functional, contained, directed form, are also the psychological architecture of people who execute at an elite level. The surgeon who detaches emotionally before making the cut. The founder who overrides fear and signs the contract anyway. The negotiator who controls the frame of every conversation they enter. These are not warm, passive, agreeable people. They are people who have learned to operate on themselves the way a cold strategist operates on the world. Procrastination is not a time management problem. It is a self-influence problem. You are being outmaneuvered by your own subconscious. The solution is not discipline. It is counter-manipulation. You need to become your own Dark Triad operator. Before you can manipulate something, you have to understand what it wants. Your subconscious is not lazy. It is efficient. It is running a cost-benefit calculation on every action you consider taking. And when it determines that the perceived cost, discomfort, failure, judgment, exposure, outweighs the perceived reward, it generates procrastination as the output. That feeling of not being able to start is not weakness. It is your brain doing exactly what it was trained to do. The problem is that it was trained by a child, by the version of you that needed protection from embarrassment in a classroom, or from the disappointment on a parent's face, or from the humiliation of trying and being told you weren't enough. Your subconscious learned to protect you from those moments by keeping you still, by telling you to wait, by manufacturing urgency about everything except the thing that mattered. And now you're an adult trying to build something real, and that same child-written program is running in the background of every decision you make. You cannot negotiate with it. You cannot reason with it. You cannot motivate your way past it with affirmations. You have to override it. The 3-part framework for doing that draws from each node of the Dark Triad, not as personality traits to embody, but as operational stances to activate in precise, temporary, targeted ways. The first tool is drawn from the narcissistic node, and specifically from the one thing that functional narcissism does extremely well: identity anchoring. Clinical narcissism is destructive because the identity it anchors to is grandiose, fragile, and dependent on external validation. But the mechanism itself, the way a narcissistic personality organizes behavior around a fixed self-concept, is extraordinarily powerful when you redirect it inward and make it accurate. Here is the psychological principle. Humans do not act their way into identities. They act from them. You do not become a person who executes by learning to execute. You execute because you have decided, at the identity level, that you are someone who does. The subconscious follows identity. It does not lead it. Procrastination is an identity mismatch. When you sit down to do the work and feel resistance, your subconscious is telling you that this behavior doesn't match who you believe you are. The task belongs to a version of you that doesn't exist yet, and your brain is refusing to perform as a character it hasn't been cast as. The cold, calculated fix. You do not wait to feel ready. You assign yourself the identity before the evidence arrives. This is not positive thinking. This is a deliberate cognitive override, a forced identity installation. You decide with complete emotional neutrality and zero need for it to feel true yet that you are someone who does this, Not someone who is trying to, not someone who wants to, someone who does. Then you act from that identity the way you act from any other, automatically, without deliberation, without negotiating with the feeling. Narcissism, weaponized on yourself, looks like this. Your self-concept is non-negotiable. It is not available for revision based on how you feel on a given afternoon. You are someone who executes. That is already true. Act accordingly. Machiavellianism, at its functional core, is about one thing: controlling the conditions before the game begins. The Machiavellian operator does not rely on willpower in the moment. They arrange the environment so that the desired outcome is the path of least resistance. They control the frame before they enter the room. They remove the variables that could compromise the result. They engineer the situation so that the target, in this case, yourself, can only move in one direction. Your subconscious responds to environment with the same predictability that it responds to identity. If the conditions around you are set up to reward distraction, you will be distracted, not because you're weak, because you're human and your brain is doing its job. The Machiavellian approach does not fight the brain's tendency toward ease. It makes the work the easiest thing available. This is environmental architecture, and it is cold, calculated, and ruthlessly effective. You are not designing a comfortable workspace. You are designing a psychological trap, one that captures your own attention and makes escape more effortful than compliance. The specific methodology: remove optionality before you sit down. Close every tab that isn't the work. Put the phone in another room, not silenced, absent. Reduce the decision space around the task to zero. The subconscious delays action when it perceives alternatives. No alternatives means no deliberation. No deliberation means execution begins. Then you go further. You install a commitment mechanism, something that makes not starting cost more than starting. You tell someone what you're doing. You set a public deadline. You use a body double, a co-working session, a timer that runs visibly. These are not accountability tools. They are psychological leverage instruments. You are making the cost of avoidance real, immediate, and social. The three conditions under which your subconscious recalculates and chooses action. Machiavellianism, directed inward, looks like this. You do not trust yourself in an uncontrolled environment. You engineer the conditions so that your own subconscious has no good alternative but to cooperate. This is the one people resist the most, and it's the most important. The functional trait at the core of what researchers sometimes call subclinical psychopathy is emotional detachment, the capacity to move through high-stakes situations without being governed by the emotional noise that surrounds them. In its pathological form, this produces people who lack empathy and harm others without remorse. But that's the excess. The underlying mechanism, the ability to observe an emotional state without being controlled by it, is a learnable, contained skill. And it is the direct antidote to the emotional architecture of procrastination. Here is what procrastination actually feels like from the inside: anxiety about the quality of the output, dread about the size of the task, shame preloaded in advance, the anticipation of failure before a single word has been written, a single action taken. These are not logical states. They are emotional interference patterns. And as long as you are fused with them, as long as you experience these feelings as yourself, you cannot act against them. Asking yourself to start despite that emotional noise is like asking yourself to walk forward while fully convinced that the floor in front of you isn't real. The psychopathic move is emotional severance. You learn to observe the feeling without entering it. This is not suppression. Suppression is a pressure valve strategy. Push the feeling down and it builds elsewhere. Severance is categorically different. It is the recognition that the emotion is a data point, not a command. That the discomfort you feel when you open the document is not evidence that the task is dangerous. It is your subconscious running an old script. You can see the script running. You can note it, and you can continue. The operational practice. Before you begin the task, you take 30 seconds and name what you're feeling with clinical precision. Not, "I'm anxious." That is identity fusion. Instead, there is a feeling of anticipatory discomfort present. You place it outside yourself, you observe it. Then you proceed as if it is background noise, because neurologically, that is exactly what it is. Functional psychopathy, directed inward, looks like this. The feeling is not your authority. It is information. You receive it, you register it, and you execute anyway, with the same emotional temperature as someone who has been through this hallway 100 times and is no longer impressed by what lives in it. These three moves, identity anchoring, environmental architecture, and emotional severance, are not a sequence. They are simultaneous installations. You do not complete one and move to the next. You run all three as a single psychological operating system. Here is what it looks like in practice. The night before, you architect. You close what needs to be closed. You set the environment before willpower is a factor. You remove the exits. This is your Machiavellian move, and it requires 5 minutes of cold, deliberate setup. Not inspiration. Not motivation. Setup. In the morning, before you touch the task, you anchor. You do not ask yourself how you feel about the work. You do not assess your readiness. You remind yourself, once, with complete neutrality, who you are. You are someone who does this. That is not aspirational, it is operational. When you sit down and the resistance arrives, and it will arrive, you sever. You name what you feel without becoming it. You acknowledge the script without following it. And you begin. Not when you're ready. Now. The subconscious will test this protocol. The first few times, the resistance will feel significant. This is expected. The brain does not immediately accept a reprogrammed frame. It will send the discomfort louder, trying to get you to revert. This is not a sign that the method is failing, it is a sign that it's working. The subconscious escalates when its authority is being overridden. You do not negotiate. You continue. After several consistent applications, something shifts. The resistance doesn't disappear entirely, it becomes quieter, shorter, less convincing, because the subconscious is a learning system. When it repeatedly observes that its interference did not produce a behavioral change, it updates its model. Over time, it stops sending the signal with the same intensity. Not because you've cured yourself of something, because you've trained your own psychology the same way you'd train anything else. Through consistent, deliberate, emotionally neutral repetition. You have been living inside a psychological system that was built without your consent, by a version of you that no longer exists, to protect you from threats that are no longer real. Procrastination is not your personality. It is a program, and programs can be overridden, not with more motivation, not with better planning, not with the kind of soft encouragement that sounds good and changes nothing, with precision, with coldness, with the same calculated influence that the most effective operators in any domain have always used, turned completely, deliberately, and without apology on themselves. The Dark Triad is not a path, it is a toolkit, and what you do with the toolkit depends entirely on the intelligence behind the hand that holds it. Your subconscious has been running this game on you for years. It's time to run it back.